She spent her life teaching children about kindness, about doing the right thing. But on one freezing morning in 1992, kindness met cruelty. Her name was Christy Myrick, and her story would haunt Lancaster for a generation, until science gave her the voice she'd been waiting for. December 21st, 1992, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The morning began like any other winter day, the kind that makes your breath visible in short clouds and turns every sound sharper, clearer. The world was wrapped in a cold stillness, and for a moment, it felt peaceful. It was the last Monday before Christmas break. 2 weeks of freedom stretched ahead for every student in the building. Presents waited under trees at home, cookies baked in warm kitchens. Parents whispered about surprises hidden in closets. Everything about that morning should have been ordinary, but inside room 14, there was only silence. At 8:30 a.m., students began to gather outside the locked door, their small hands gripping backpack straps, shifting from one foot to the other. 26 sixth graders, bundled in coats and scarves, whispered among themselves, "Where's Miss Myrick? Maybe she's running late." "She's never late." The hallway buzzed with confusion. The door was locked. The lights were off. The cheerful voice that usually greeted them, "Good morning, my stars," was absent. Down the hall, Principal Harry Goodman noticed the gathering of children. He smiled at first, expecting laughter or a prank, but as he approached, he saw their faces, puzzled, anxious. He placed his hand on the cold metal door handle. Locked. Through the small rectangular window, darkness. No code on the hook, no light on her desk, no sign of movement. Goodman's expression shifted. In 5 years of knowing her, Christy Myrick had never been late. Not once. Not even by 5 minutes. She was the kind of teacher who arrived early enough to warm the room before her students did. She'd have her lessons neatly outlined, coffee steaming beside her notes, her gentle handwriting filling the chalkboard before the first bell. But that morning, nothing. A hollow feeling settled in Goodman's chest. The kind of feeling you can't explain, but something was wrong. He excused the children quietly, ushering them toward another classroom. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled as he reached for his car keys. The drive to Christie's townhouse was 10 minutes, maybe less. He told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe her car wouldn't start, maybe she'd caught the flu. But as the tires rolled over the icy road, his heart pounded harder. Every logical explanation felt thinner than the December air. The radio played Christmas music, Silent Night, and for a strange moment, it felt cruel. Goodman's eyes scanned the roadside for a familiar blue sedan. Nothing. No breakdown, no hazard lights, no sign of her at all. He turned down Crest Lane, the quiet street where Christy lived with her roommate. Rows of townhomes sat still under the morning frost. A mailbox door hung open, its hinge squeaking in the wind. And then he saw it. Christy's front door, slightly open, not wide, just enough to be wrong. He pulled over quickly, tires crunching against the curb. The neighborhood was still, too still. Goodman stepped out, his breath forming clouds in the air. He called out softly, his voice catching, "Christy!" Silence. He took a hesitant step closer. The open door swayed slightly, creaking. He pushed it wider. Warm air escaped the house, wrapping around him like a ghost. A coat hung neatly on the rack. Christmas decorations sat on a small wooden shelf. A faint smell of cinnamon candles lingered. Everything was normal except for the silence. He took another step, and another. Then he saw her. Christy lay on the living room floor, still in her winter coat and gloves. Her bag, the one she carried to school every day, sat near the door, half-zipped. Wrapped gifts for her students were scattered beside it, each one labeled in her neat handwriting, "To Jacob, To Emily, to Sarah. Goodman froze. His knees buckled. The warmth of the house suddenly felt suffocating. He didn't need to touch her to know. Something inside him broke before his mind caught up. He stumbled back, gasping, fumbling for the phone on the table. His voice shook as he spoke. 911. It's Christy. Something's wrong. She's not moving. The world outside continued. Neighbors warming cars, children walking to school, unaware that one of their own had just fallen victim to something far darker than winter. By 9 a.m., police sirens echoed through East Lampeter Township. Red and blue lights painted the snow-covered lawns. Neighbors gathered on porches, wrapped in coats, whispering. Nobody knew what had happened, only that something terrible had shattered the calm of their community. Detectives moved through the small living room, their boots squeaking against the floor. Paramedics stood quietly by the door. Principal Goodman sat in his car, head in his hands. Inside, the scene spoke of violence, of a struggle that had ended too soon. The details would later be revealed by investigators. But in that moment, it was only grief, confusion, and disbelief. Later, as the coroner's van pulled away, a light snow began to fall again. Soft, slow flakes drifted down over the flashing lights and the small crowd. A neighbor whispered through trembling lips, "She was such a good person." And somewhere in the distance, the church bells of Lancaster began to ring. It was still Monday morning, still Christmas week. But for the children of room 14, for her family, for the man who found her, nothing about life would ever be the same. For 5 years, Christy Myrick filled her classroom with light. On that cold December morning, that light went out, leaving behind a silence that would haunt Lancaster County for decades. This was only the beginning. Before the sirens, before the fear, before Lancaster became a name whispered on national news, there was Christy, just Christy. It's late summer, 1992. The camera drifts across golden Pennsylvania fields, tall cornstalks swaying in the wind. Children play outside under a sky brushed with orange light. And somewhere, on the edge of that small town, a teacher prepares for her first day of the new school year. Inside her modest townhouse, Christy Myrick sits cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of colored paper, markers, and glitter glue. She hums softly to herself as she writes names on handmade name tags. Jacob, Emily, Sarah, Marcus. The handwriting is neat, round, warm, the kind of handwriting that made even the smallest child feel special. She was 25 years old, a 6th grade teacher at Roarstown Elementary School. 5 years into a job she didn't just love. She lived for it. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise. She'd turn on the small lamp by her desk, the one with a faded yellow shade, and write lesson notes while the rest of the school was still dark. To her, teaching wasn't a duty. It was a calling. Some people go through life trying to find their purpose. Christy found hers before she could even spell it. When other kids played with dolls or bikes, Christy lined up her stuffed animals in perfect rows, pretending they were her students. She'd use her mother's old notepads to write homework assignments and report cards. "I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up," she would say, holding her father's hand as they walked to church on Sundays. Her parents smiled, and she kept that promise. The Myrick family was close, the kind of family that believed in Sunday dinners, Christmas ornaments passed down through generations, and handwritten birthday cards. Her father, Vincent Myrick Sr., worked long hours as a postal clerk. Her mother, Mary, was the quiet strength of the home, the kind of woman who made love visible in small things. Folded laundry, hot soup, prayers before bed. And then there was Vincent Jr., Christy's younger brother, her best friend since childhood. They teased each other endlessly, but when life got heavy, He was always the first to call. Christy was sunshine. Vincent would later say in an interview, his voice breaking, "If she was in the room, you knew it. Not because she was loud, but because she made you feel seen." Lancaster County in 1992 was picture perfect. Rolling fields, covered bridges, and white church steeples piercing the skyline. It was the kind of town where people waved from porches, where mailmen still knew every dog by name, and where teachers were local heroes. The kind of place where people said, "Nothing bad ever happens here." Christy fit into that world effortlessly. She was the kind of neighbor who'd shovel your driveway before you woke up. The kind of teacher who'd stay after school to help a struggling student. No complaints, no overtime pay, just care. At the school's Christmas fair that year, she dressed as Mrs. Claus for her students. Red velvet skirt, jingling hat, handing out candy canes. Someone snapped a photo that night. Her arms open wide, surrounded by laughing kids. That photo would later become an icon in Lancaster. Printed in newspapers, taped to candles, shared across television screens. Room 14 was her world. Bright, colorful, alive. The chalkboard always neat, with her handwriting curling like calligraphy. A paper snowman in the corner. A jar of marbles on the shelf, her good deed jar, where she'd drop a marble every time a student helped another. Her students adored her. She called them my stars. Each one, she said, had light waiting to shine. "When I grow up," one of her students once told his mother, "I want to be like Miss Merrick because she believes I'm smart, even when I'm not." Parents loved her too. She wrote personal notes home before every break, short messages celebrating each child's progress. Those notes, decades later, would still sit in drawers and memory boxes. By mid-December, Lancaster was glowing. Twinkling lights hung across Main Street. The smell of pine filled the air, and the community buzzed with holiday spirit. Christy was preparing, as always, for her students. She'd wrapped small gifts, pencils, stickers, candy canes, each one tied with a handwritten tag. She spent hours doing it, humming to herself as snow tapped gently against her window. On the kitchen counter sat her mother's sugar cookie recipe, half-finished dough, and a note reminding her of dinner at home that weekend. Everything was normal. Everything was good. December 21st was supposed to be like every other day. A Monday morning, the last week before break. She woke early, showered, got dressed, her routine as precise as ever. Her roommate, Sharon, said their last words were ordinary. "Have a good day. You too. No arguments. No noise. No signs of trouble." Sharon closed the door behind her at 7 a.m. It was still dark outside. Snowflakes drifted through the cold Pennsylvania air. Christy put on her winter coat, gloves, and scarf. She picked up her school bag, her gift bag for the children, and she never made it out the door. The narrator pauses, the music low and somber. There's something sacred about routine, the small, familiar motions that make us feel safe. But on that December morning, routine became a timeline. Every second mattered. Every minute was a question that would haunt investigators for decades. At the Merrick home, the phone rang at 9:20 a.m. Mary was baking when she answered. Her husband had just left for work. It was the school office. "Mrs. Merrick, this is Principal Goodman. We're not sure where Christy is." Mary smiled faintly. "She's probably on her way. Maybe her car won't start." But as the call went on, her face changed. She turned pale, the spoon slipping from her hand. The rest of the day blurred sirens, calls, neighbors gathering in the yard, and then the words no mother should ever hear. As night fell over Lancaster, the town lights flickered like candles in mourning. Parents pulled their children close. Teachers wept quietly in the staff room. And in room 14, 26 wrapped gifts sat untouched on a wooden desk. The paper still glittered faintly in the dark. A small tag read, "To my stars, never stop shining. Love, Miss Myrick." Before the crime scene tape, before the headlines, before the decades of waiting, there was a woman who believed in light. She saw the best in everyone, even the broken ones. What no one knew then was that one of those broken souls was watching her, and soon he would change everything. The street was still that morning. Too still. Only the crunch of boots on frozen ground broke the silence. Red and blue lights pulsed against snow-covered lawns, washing the quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood in flashes of color. The door to Christy Myrick's townhouse stood open now, its Christmas wreath swaying in the cold wind. Inside, detectives moved carefully, slow, deliberate, their voices low. Every movement felt heavy, as if the house itself resisted the intrusion. Detective Mark Stenson of the East Lampeter Township Police Department was the first investigator on scene. He'd seen dozens of cases before, thefts, accidents, a few domestic calls, but never this. Not here. Not in this safe, postcard-perfect town. He paused on the threshold, notebook in hand. The smell of cinnamon candles still hung in the air, faint but unmistakable. A record player near the couch had stopped mid-song. A Christmas album, Silent Night. Everything was so normal, he would later say. That's what made it unbearable. The room told a story without words. The coffee table was overturned, books scattered like fallen leaves. A mug lay shattered near the carpet, a puddle of coffee slowly freezing on the floorboards. Christy's winter coat was still buttoned, her gloves still on. A bag near the door had burst open, lesson plans, red graded papers, and small wrapped presents spilling out. Each one bore the name of a child from room 14. On the floor beside her, a wooden cutting board lay broken in half. It would later be confirmed as a weapon. Detective Stenson knelt beside it, careful not to touch. He looked toward the Christmas tree in the corner, its lights still blinking faintly, their reflection glinting off shattered glass. It was a picture of warmth, he said softly, turned inside out. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather. Neighbors in coats and slippers stood behind the yellow tape, whispering. A woman clutched her robe tighter. A man shook his head, repeating the same line over and over. This kind of thing doesn't happen here. But inside, the silence was absolute. Not even the furnace dared to hum. The technicians arrived next, precise, focused, emotionless. Cameras clicked in steady rhythm. Gloved hands lifted objects one by one, sealing them into bags labeled with time and number. Fiber samples, carpet scrapings, a single hair clinging to the couch armrest. Every fragment of that room became evidence, a potential whisper of the truth. From Christie's body, samples were collected and preserved. DNA, a technology still young in 1992, would become the heart of the case, though no one yet realized how long that heart would take to beat. Detective Stenson wrote in his report, "Victim appears to have been attacked moments before departure for work. Evidence suggests struggle occurred near the door. Possible element of surprise." He didn't write what he was really thinking, that whoever did this knew her routine, knew exactly when she'd be alone. At 10:12 a.m., the phone rang at the Myrick household. Mary Myrick answered, trembling. A voice on the other end spoke words she couldn't process. By the time she dropped the receiver, her husband had already fallen to his knees. Across town, the church bells tolled the noon hour, long, echoing notes that seemed to mourn with them. At Rohrstown Elementary, the news spread quietly at first, then like wildfire. Teachers gathered in the hallway, whispering, crying. Someone fainted in the staff lounge. Principal Goodman, the man who had found her, could barely stand. He sat behind his desk, staring at the gifts she'd left behind for her students. How do you tell 26 sixth graders that their teacher is gone? How do you explain murder to 11-year-olds? By afternoon, parents were arriving one by one, pulling their children out early. In the parking lot, mothers held their kids close, whispering, "You're safe," but they didn't believe it. No one did. State police were called in. Then the FBI. Not because Lancaster was large, but because what they found was brutal, personal, and precise. The coroner's report would later confirm. Cause of death: strangulation. Contributing injuries: blunt force trauma to the head and neck. Signs of sexual assault present. The words were clinical, detached. But to Christie's family, they were unbearable. Her brother refused to read the report. Her mother would later say, "I stopped when I saw her name on the first page." 2 neighbors came forward that evening. They'd been walking their dog around 7:15 a.m. when they heard a scream, sharp, brief, then gone. They paused, looked toward Christie's townhouse, uncertain. They hesitated, then walked on. Maybe it was nothing. One of them told police, voice shaking. "We thought maybe someone burned their hand or dropped something. We didn't know." They would carry that regret for the rest of their lives. By the next day, reporters had descended on the quiet community. Cameras rolled outside the school. Headlines screamed, "Beloved teacher found dead in home. Lancaster in shock." But behind the headlines were faces. Real people, numb with disbelief. Christie's students drew cards and taped them to the school fence. One read in shaky handwriting, "I will miss you, Miss Merrick. You said I could be anything. I'll be brave." That night, Detective Stenson sat alone in his office, staring at the evidence board. Polaroids pinned in neat rows, the townhouse, the doorway, the bag of gifts. He couldn't shake one image. Her gloves still on, as if she'd been moments from leaving. He replayed every step of the morning in his head. The timing was tight, too tight for a random attack. "This wasn't chance," he murmured. "It was choice." Outside his window, snow began to fall again. Soft, unhurried, cruel in its beauty. He wrote one final line in his notes before leaving for the night. Whoever did this knew her life well enough to end it quietly. The camera pans slowly across the darkened school building. The paper snowflakes still hang in the hallway. Room 14 remains locked. Inside, the chalkboard still reads the lesson plan for that day. Monday, the meaning of giving. The music fades into a somber piano melody. The investigation had begun. A web of interviews, evidence, and unanswered questions. But beneath the surface of procedure and science lay something deeper, a quiet grief that would shadow Lancaster for years. They had the evidence. They had the DNA. But what they didn't have was a name. The day after the discovery, Lancaster County didn't feel like itself. The morning air was still cold, still filled with the same pale winter light. But something invisible had changed, like the air had turned heavier. The streets were quieter. The laughter of schoolchildren, once echoing across the neighborhood, had been replaced by whispers. People didn't make eye contact that day. Everywhere you looked, someone was crying. At Roarstown Elementary, the Christmas decorations still hung in the hallways. The paper chains, the snowflakes, the handmade ornaments. They fluttered gently each time the door opened, as if unaware that their maker was gone. Room 14 remained closed. A strip of yellow tape stretched across the door. Behind it, untouched, were the last moments of normal life. Christie's chalk handwriting still on the board, the calendar still showing December 1992, and her coffee mug half full on the desk. Principal Harry Goodman stood in the hallway for a long time that morning. He had been a teacher for over 20 years, but he had never felt this kind of silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a space. It settles in your bones. He had to face something no principal ever wants to do. He had to speak to the children. In the auditorium, 200 students sat on folding chairs. Most didn't know why they were there. Some giggled nervously. Others whispered about police cars and flashing lights. Principal Goodman stepped up to the microphone. His voice shook even though he'd practiced. He told them that Miss Merrick, their teacher, their friend, their school mom, wouldn't be coming back. He didn't use the word murder. He couldn't. He just said, something very bad happened to her, and we're all very sad. The room was still. Then came a sound soft, fragile, a child's sob, and then another. Within moments, the auditorium filled with the sound of children crying. Teachers held them, whispering, "It's okay," even though it wasn't, because no one could make sense of it. Not the adults, not the kids, no one. By afternoon, the school parking lot overflowed. Parents arrived early, eyes wide with fear. They hugged their children a little tighter than usual. Some cried in their cars before driving away. News cameras lined the street outside, flashing lights over the school sign. Roarstown Elementary, where learning shines. That slogan would later be taken down. For a while, nothing about learning felt like shining anymore. That night, the community gathered outside the school. Candles flickered in trembling hands. Snow fell softly, melting against the warm wax and tear-streaked faces. Children stood beside their parents, bundled in scarves, holding hand-drawn cards. Some held small gifts, pencils and candy canes, the same ones Christy had wrapped for them days earlier. A local pastor led the prayer. His voice broke halfway through. "We gather not to understand, but to remember. To remember a woman who believed every child was a star, and who lit the way for so many." The camera pans across the crowd. 1,000 faces lit by candlelight, united by grief. Back at the family's house, Christmas lights still hung on the porch, but no one turned them on that night. Inside, the house smelled like sugar cookies and grief. The kitchen table was still set for Sunday dinner, the one Christy was supposed to attend. A single plate sat untouched. Her mother, Mary, refused to go upstairs. Her father sat in the living room, staring at the family photo on the mantel, Christy in her graduation gown, smiling. Her brother, Vincent Jr., couldn't sit still. He paced the hallway, hands clenched. "I should have checked on her," he said over and over. "I should have called that morning." But there were no answers, only silence, and the sound of the clock ticking, minute by minute, marking time that would never move the same again. The next morning, the headlines spread statewide. "Teacher found dead in Pennsylvania home." "A town in shock. Who killed Christy M.?" News vans camped outside the family's yard. Reporters shouted questions that no one could bear to answer. Mary stood at the window, blinds drawn, praying they would leave. But the world was watching now, and the small, quiet town of Lancaster had become a symbol of something darker. A reminder that even the safest places aren't safe forever. In the days that followed, locks sold out at every hardware store. Neighbors who once left their doors open now checked them twice. Parents no longer let their children walk to school alone. A sense of suspicion crept in, quiet, invisible everywhere. It felt like anyone could be next, one resident later recalled. "We looked at each other differently after that. The grocery store, the post office, the church, every gathering place became a rumor mill. Everyone had theories. Everyone whispered names. But no one had answers." On December 28, 1992, the town gathered one last time, this time at St. Anne's Church. Snow fell heavy that morning, blanketing everything in white. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and candle wax. Children from room 14 sat together in the front row, their small faces pale and confused. Each one clutched a single white rose. When the choir sang Amazing Grace, the sound wavered through the room. Beautiful, broken, human. Principal Goodman gave the eulogy. He said what everyone already knew. Christy loved without limits, and if love could have saved her, she'd still be here. As the coffin was carried out, one student whispered, "Goodbye, Miss Merrick," and a row of small voices echoed softly, "Goodbye." After the funeral, the world moved on, as it always does. The reporters left. The police kept working quietly. Christmas passed. New Year's came and went. But in Lancaster, time didn't move forward. It simply paused, stuck in that December morning. For Christy's family, life split into two parts, before and after. Her room at home remained untouched. The bed made, the book stacked, the perfume bottle still half full. Her mother couldn't bring herself to dust the dresser. "If I clean it," she whispered, "it'll be like she was never here." Grief doesn't end. It just changes shape. For Lancaster, it became part of the air, invisible but always there. For Christy's students, it was the first time they learned what loss really meant. For her family, it was a wound that never fully closed. And for the detectives, it was a case that would haunt their careers, a name they couldn't forget. The camera pans across the town, the empty classroom, the snow-covered church, the flickering candles at the school gate, and finally, the evidence boxes stacked neatly in the police archives, labeled Merrick Christiel. December 21st, 92. It would be easy to call it a tragedy, to mourn and move on. But this story didn't end in 1992, because somewhere in those boxes was a secret, microscopic, silent patient, a clue waiting for its time, a voice waiting to be heard. And when science caught up with faith, the truth would finally rise. Winter faded. The snow melted from Lancaster's lawns, revealing dead grass beneath, and with it, the illusion that time could heal what happened. But time did not heal. It only stretched, and with every passing week, the questions grew heavier. Who killed Christy Merrick? Why her? And how could someone commit something so brutal in broad daylight and vanish without a trace? Detectives worked day and night through January and February of 1993. The Pennsylvania State Police, East Lampeter Township officers, and FBI specialists filled every available room in the small police building. Stacks of reports, witness statements, and photos covered the desks. The initial crime scene yielded evidence: DNA, fingerprints, hair fibers, carpet samples, partial shoe prints. But technology in 1993 couldn't do what it would decades later. The DNA profile was strong, but the national database, known as CODIS, was still young, limited, and incomplete. They had a genetic fingerprint, but no match. It was like holding the killer's shadow, Detective Mark Stenson later said. You could see the outline, but not the face. As is standard, the investigation began closest to home. Every man who knew Christy, every friend, every coworker, every neighbor was interviewed. Her ex-boyfriend, David Holt, a kind-hearted fellow teacher who dated her briefly the year before, was brought in for questioning. He answered every question, willingly provided a DNA sample, and cried through most of the interview. It wasn't him. A local handyman who serviced the school's heating system was questioned next. He had a prior trespassing record. He too gave his DNA. No match. Parents of her students, church acquaintances, former classmates. All investigated, all cleared. The police knocked on hundreds of doors. They followed every rumor, every tip, every piece of gossip whispered across Lancaster. Each lead started with hope. Each one ended in disappointment. Detective Stenson couldn't let it go. He'd drive past Christie's townhouse every morning before work, parking down the street, staring at the door as if it might open again. He reread his notes at night, the handwriting smudged with coffee and fatigue. He replayed every possible timeline. 7 a.m., roommate leaves. 7:10, neighbors hear scream. 7:30, Christie should have been in her car. 7:45, she's gone. It was only a 45-minute window. Who knew her schedule that precisely? Who was bold enough to attack in daylight? He filled an entire notebook with one question. What did I miss? His wife began leaving dinner out for him in the microwave. His kids stopped asking when he'd come home. For Mark Stenson, the Myrick case became more than a file. It became a ghost. Months passed. The story slipped from front-page news to small headlines buried deep inside the Lancaster Times. A few paragraphs, a photo, a plea for tips. And then, slowly, it faded from the papers altogether. But in town, the silence remained. The elementary school reopened room 14 the next fall. But no teacher lasted more than a year there. They said the energy felt strange, cold, heavy. Parents still locked their doors early. Children still crossed the street faster when walking past Christie's old townhouse. People whispered less about the murder, but they never forgot it. By 1995, 3 years had gone by. Detective Stenson now had gray at his temples. His desk had new files, new cases, but the Myrick file never moved. It sat on the corner, gathering dust and fingerprints that weren't evidence but time. Each year on December 21st, Christie's family gathered quietly at home. Her mother lit a candle in the window. Her father polished her old classroom photo frame. Her brother Vincent stood outside the house, staring at the stars, whispering, "You deserved better, sis. You deserved to grow old." But justice was still nowhere in sight. By 1996, the case was reassigned to Detective Laura Henning, a younger officer known for her methodical approach. She re-examined every document, every photo, every DNA log. But the story was the same. Strong profile, no match. She ordered new interviews. Neighbors had moved. Memories had blurred. And one key witness, the woman who heard the scream, had passed away from illness. The town had aged. The case had not. It felt like chasing a ghost through fog, Henning said years later. Every time you thought you saw a shape, it vanished. In 1998, the file was officially moved to the cold case unit. Detective Stenson attended the meeting in silence. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just watched as the box was carried down the hall and placed on a shelf with dozens of others, each marked by a name, each representing someone waiting for answers. On the spine of one box, Myrick, Christie L. Date, December 21st, 92 status, unsolved. That word, unsolved, burned itself into everyone who ever touched the file. For Christie's parents, grief turned to exhaustion. Mary stopped attending church because she couldn't bear the pitying looks. Vincent Sr. retired early, unable to keep delivering mail through the same streets where his daughter once smiled at him from her classroom window. Her brother Vincent Jr. grew angrier each year. He left Lancaster for college, but the guilt followed him. Every December, he said, I'd hear carols and feel sick. Everyone else celebrated. And I just remembered how she died. The holidays became a reminder, not a comfort. In 1999, before his retirement, Stenson stopped by the Myrick house one final time. He didn't come to report anything new. There wasn't anything. He came to apologize. Mary answered the door, her eyes hollow but kind. She invited him in for tea. They sat quietly for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, he said, I promised you I'd find him. I'm sorry I didn't. She reached across the table, her hands trembling, and said softly, "You didn't fail her. Time did." That moment would stay with him until his last breath. The camera lingers on dust-covered evidence boxes. Voice calm, reflective, haunting. Sometimes justice isn't denied. It's delayed, buried under the weight of years, waiting for the world to catch up. The 1990s ended with no arrest, no answers, no closure. Christie's name faded from the news, but not from memory. And somewhere, the man who did it kept living, shopping in the same stores, driving the same roads, smiling at the same faces that once grieved her. It's now 2000. The millennium dawns with fireworks and celebration across America. But in one quiet Pennsylvania home, a candle still burns in a window. It's been burning for 8 years. The camera zooms slowly into the flickering light, the reflection of Mary Myrick's face faintly visible in the glass. The world moved on, but Lancaster never truly did. For every question they asked, the answer remained the same: no match, no suspect, no piece. It would take nearly 3 decades, and a drop of DNA no larger than a tear, to finally tell the truth. The years rolled forward, quiet and heavy. By the time the new millennium arrived, Christy Myrick had been gone for nearly 8 years. Children who once filled her classroom were adults now, some in college, some with families of their own. But every December, when the air grew cold and the church bells echoed through Lancaster, they still remembered. They still saw her smile. They still wondered what kind of person could have taken her away. Lancaster changed slowly, like a photograph fading at the edges. The small-town innocence that once defined it never fully returned. People still waved to each other at stoplights, still gathered for Friday night football games. But beneath every friendly greeting was something unspoken. A memory, a loss, a scar. New families moved into the Myrick townhouse complex. Children played in the same courtyard where the 2 neighbors once heard a scream. Most of them didn't know what had happened there, but the older residents did, and they never forgot. Every few years, someone would bring flowers and place them quietly near the stoop of Christie's old front door. No note, no announcement, just remembrance. At the Myrick home, time moved differently. Mary Myrick kept her daughter's room exactly as it had been in 1992. The curtains, the floral bedspread, the bookshelf stacked with lesson plans and novels about teaching. The only thing that changed was the layer of dust, soft, gray, undisturbed. Every night before bed, she walked into that room and touched the edge of Christie's pillow. Sometimes she whispered goodnight. Sometimes she didn't speak at all. Her husband, Vincent Sr., spent most days sitting by the window. He'd retired from the postal service, though retirement didn't feel like rest. It felt like waiting. On their kitchen calendar, one date was always circled in red: December 21st. Every year, without fail. Their son, Vincent Jr., had moved to Philadelphia. He tried to build a new life. New job, new friends, new city. But the past followed him. Each Christmas, he returned home to light a candle for his sister. He always brought flowers. Always the same kind, white lilies. Her favorite. "We thought time would bring peace," he once said. "It just brought distance." Inside the Pennsylvania State Police headquarters, the Myrick case sat in the cold case archive. A temperature-controlled room filled with rows of metal shelves, each holding boxes that represented unfinished stories. The box labeled Myrick Christiel sat on a middle shelf between 2 other names that had also never found justice. Inside were dozens of files, photographs, and sealed envelopes containing samples that once held promise, hair fibers, fingernail scrapings, carpet threads, and several swabs of preserved biological evidence. For years, those swabs sat in darkness, frozen in sterile conditions, untouched but not forgotten. Every few months, a new detective would pass through the cold case unit and pull the file. They'd read through it, shake their head, whisper, "Such a waste," and then put it back. No new leads, no matches in the database. The case stayed cold. But while Lancaster slept, science evolved. By the early 2000s, the FBI's CODIS system, the Combined DNA Index System, had grown. Tens of thousands of new profiles were added each year. Technology that once took weeks could now generate results in hours. And quietly, one woman would ensure Christie's case was never erased by time. Her name was Emily Rhodes, a forensic biologist in her mid-30s, meticulous and soft-spoken, known for her persistence and compassion. In 2002, she joined the State Police Forensic Lab in Harrisburg. On her second week, she stumbled upon the Myrick case while reviewing old DNA storage logs. The date caught her attention. 1992, a decade earlier. She pulled the case file and read the summary. Her hands stopped turning pages halfway through. A young teacher, killed in her own home, unsolved. Something in her chest tightened. "She reminded me of my sister," Emily would later say. "The same age, the same warmth. I couldn't let it stay cold." She requested permission to retest the samples, but the answer came back predictable. Not enough funding. Not a priority. Too old to yield results. She didn't argue. She waited. But every time she passed the evidence freezer, she paused for a moment, her eyes resting on the box with Christie's name. She promised herself someday. By 2005, most of the original investigators had retired. Detective Mark Stenson had passed away the year before from heart failure. In his desk, his family found a folder labeled Myrick Case Notes, Personal. Inside was a photograph of Christie's classroom and a handwritten line at the bottom. "Don't forget her." Those words would resurface later, long after the case reopened. A younger detective, Ryan Keating, took interest in the file in 2007. He represented a new era, tech-savvy, analytical, less sentimental. But even he couldn't shake the emotion that clung to the case. "It was like walking into someone else's unfinished prayer," he said. He collaborated with Emily Rhodes to begin reevaluating cold cases that contained preserved DNA. Christie's case sat near the top of their list, not because of its publicity, but because of the quality of the evidence. Outside the lab, life continued. Technology surged. People carried cell phones now. DNA made headlines in other cases, each solved story a reminder that science could do what hope alone could not. Across America, old mysteries began finding their endings. Serial offenders caught through new matching techniques. Families reunited with long-lost truth. And in Lancaster, whispers started again. "Maybe they'll find her killer one day," people said in grocery stores, at church, at school meetings. "Maybe the future will do what the past couldn't." But years still passed. 2008, 2010, 2015. The box still sat in storage. The name still waited. And Emily Rhodes still remembered her promise. By 2016, Christie's parents were in their 70s. Her father's hair had turned completely white. Her mother walked with a cane. They no longer expected a phone call. They had learned to live with unanswered prayers. Their son Vincent visited often, still carrying fresh lilies. He talked to his parents about his work, his own children, his wife. But sometimes, mid-sentence, he'd stop, eyes fixed on a photo of Christie by the fireplace. "She would have been 50 now," he whispered once. "She should have had her own family." No one replied. Some silences are too deep for words. Then, in late 2017, something changed. Funding arrived for a statewide cold case reevaluation project, a push to re-examine old DNA using next-generation sequencing and genealogical databases. Emily Rhodes, now the senior forensic analyst, immediately submitted Christie's case. She retrieved the samples herself, delicate swabs frozen for 25 years. When she held them, frost melted around the edges of the tubes, forming tiny droplets of water. It felt like holding time itself, she said. 25 years of waiting, and maybe, finally, an answer. The voice grows softer, intimate. The imagery slows. The whirring of machines. The faint hum of fluorescent lights. A scientist's gloved hands placing a vial into the sequencer. Science doesn't forget. It waits. It evolves. While grief grows quiet, data grows stronger. While memories fade, molecules remain. And after 25 years of silence, a whisper from the past was about to speak. The camera pans across the lab, sterile, bright, humming with quiet energy. Emily Rhodes watches as the sequencing data scrolls across her computer screen. Her eyes widen slightly, her breath catches. A new pattern appears, not a full match, but something close. A partial genetic connection to a family name. A bloodline. A direction. She leans forward, whispering to herself, "I think we've found him." The scene fades to black. A single date appears on screen, January 2018. For 26 years, the case had slept in silence. But in the age of DNA, silence doesn't mean forgotten. It means waiting for the right eyes, the right hands, the right moment in time. And that moment had finally come. The box that had gathered dust for 26 years was open again. But this time, the air in the room felt different. It wasn't nostalgia, it was electricity. The quiet hum of progress. The sense that after decades of silence, something was finally about to speak. January 2018. Inside the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Lab, senior scientist Emily Rhodes stared at her screen, heart pounding. The DNA sequence from Christy Myrick's preserved samples had just finished processing through next-generation analysis. The old 1992 genetic data was now sharper, more complete, each base pair now perfectly mapped by machines that didn't exist when Christy died. For years, her DNA evidence had been a silent key with no lock. But the world had changed. Now, thanks to genetic genealogy, that key could finally open doors that didn't exist before. "We're not just looking for a match," Emily explained to the cold case team. "We're looking for family, bloodlines, ancestors, relatives who can point us to him." In the 1990s, Cody's had been revolutionary but limited. It only worked if the suspect was already in the system. If they'd never been arrested or convicted, they were invisible. By 2018, companies like GeneMatch had changed everything. Millions of people had uploaded their DNA profiles online to trace ancestry, to find long-lost cousins, family origins, ethnic roots. What most never realized was that those same databases could also be used to catch killers. And that's exactly what Emily Rhodes planned to do. She uploaded the genetic profile extracted from Christie's case to the Open Genealogy database. Then she waited. Hours turned into days. Days turned into a week. And then a small notification appeared on her screen. Partial match. A relative. A surname. It wasn't the killer, but it was blood. A thread that would soon unravel an entire secret. The match belonged to a distant cousin in Maryland, someone who had uploaded their DNA for ancestry testing. From that one connection, a family tree began to form. Working with genetic genealogist Barbara Lentz, Emily and her team spent weeks tracing the family lines backwards: siblings, marriages, cousins, birth records. Each new name brought them closer to the source. Dozens of branches, hundreds of connections, until one branch caught their attention. Pennsylvania family, Lancaster County roots, and one male relative who had lived in the area in 1992. His name, Raymond Charles Rowe. Raymond Rowe was no stranger to Lancaster. He was a local DJ, known professionally as DJ Freeze. For decades, he had performed at weddings, school events, charity galas, even at the elementary school where Christy once taught. He had played music for children who'd been in her class. He danced with the same community that mourned her. He was charming, social, seemingly harmless. He had built a reputation on joy soundtracks to birthdays, graduations, and love stories. But behind the music, he carried a secret. When Detective Ryan Keating saw Roe's name on the shortlist, he froze. Roe had never been a suspect. He had never been interviewed. There was no record of him even being questioned. He was hiding in plain sight. He wasn't the kind of guy you'd look at twice, Keating recalled later. He was the guy you hired for your kid's prom. That's what made it so chilling. They began surveillance quietly. Roe lived comfortably, nice house, a wife, a teenage stepdaughter. He still DJ'd events every weekend, smiling for photos, handing out business cards. Nobody would have guessed that the man spinning love songs at weddings had taken a life 26 years earlier. Investigators couldn't arrest him on genealogical evidence alone. They needed direct DNA confirmation, a perfect, irrefutable match. So they waited, and they watched. On May 31, 2018, at a charity event in Lancaster, undercover officers attended one of Roe's performances. They watched as he drank from a plastic water bottle and wiped his face with a napkin. When he left, they retrieved both items from the trash. They were sent to the lab that night. Emily Rhodes didn't sleep that weekend. The samples were tested, sequenced, and analyzed. At 2:37 a.m., the results came in. The screen filled with two sets of data, one from 1992, one from the napkin and bottle. Side by side, line for line, letter for letter. The same man who'd left his DNA at the scene of Christy Myrick's murder was still walking free for 26 years, living a double life beneath the same Pennsylvania sky. It was like hearing a voice from the grave, Emily whispered. After all that time, Christy finally spoke. On June 25, 2018, detectives surrounded Roe's suburban home. Neighbors peeked from their windows as unmarked cars pulled up. There was no dramatic chase, no shouting, just quiet inevitability. Roe opened the door. He was calm, maybe too calm. "Raymond Roe," an officer said, "you're under arrest for the murder of Christy Myrick." He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He just nodded, almost like he'd been expecting them. When the news broke, Lancaster stopped again, just like it had in 1992. But this time it wasn't grief. It was disbelief. People recognized his face from photos. He played at my cousin's wedding. He DJ'd our church fundraiser. He was at the same school dances. How could the man behind so many smiles be responsible for so much pain? At the press conference, Detective Keating and Emily Rhodes stood side by side. Reporters filled the room, microphones flashing. Keating spoke first. After 26 years, through the perseverance of science and the dedication of this team, we have identified the man responsible for the murder of Christy Myrick. Emily followed quietly, saying only, "It wasn't luck. It was patience. Science just needed time to catch up." The journalists scribbled furiously. The words DNA genealogy appeared in headlines across the nation the next day. Lancaster, once a place of quiet mourning, was now a symbol of what modern science could do. The camera pans over the evidence table, the preserved samples, the computer screens, the photographs of Christy's classroom, and finally, the arrest photo of Raymond Roe. Soft music fades in low piano, distant strings. For 26 years, he hid behind music and crowds. He smiled at the very people he'd shattered. He watched her story fade from memory, believing time had erased it. But the past doesn't forget. It just waits for the right moment to be heard. For 26 years, he had been hiding in plain sight. A husband, a father figure, a DJ known for lighting up rooms with music and laughter. But beneath that rhythm, beneath the smile and the spotlight, lived the darkness that ended Christy Merrick's life. Raymond Charles Rowe looked like the kind of man who belonged everywhere. Medium build, clean-cut, polite. He volunteered at community events, coached kids' soccer, played at charity galas. When you saw him, you nodded hello. He nodded back. He was the soundtrack of Lancaster's joy, weddings, birthdays, graduations. And yet, as the speakers thumped and the lights flashed, he danced on the very streets that had once searched for a killer. "That's what chilled me," Detective Ryan Keating said. "He didn't disappear. He blended in. He became part of the town's happiness, the same town he'd broken." After his arrest, the interrogation room felt too small for the history that filled it. Fluorescent lights buzzed. A single camera blinked red. Across the table, Rowe sat with his hands folded, wrists cuffed loosely. Detective Keating began with the same question every investigator dreams of asking. Why? Rowe didn't answer at first. He just stared at the table, then smiled faintly, a kind of tired grin. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I didn't plan it. I just lost it." Those 4 words hung in the air like smoke. According to transcripts later released, Rowe admitted to entering Christie's townhouse the morning of December 21st, 1992. He claimed it wasn't premeditated, that he'd wanted to talk, that things got out of control, but evidence told a different story. There were no signs of forced entry. He knew the door. He knew the timing. He knew when her roommate would leave. He had been watching her. For how long, nobody knows. Maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe since one of the school events where he'd seen her smiling in a crowd. When confronted with the DNA results, Rowe said nothing. No denial, no disbelief, just silence. "It's me," he whispered. "It's always been me." He broke down then, not in grief, but in exhaustion, as if he'd carried the secret for so long that even guilt had worn out. The news spread faster than any headline. DJ Freeze arrested in 1992 teacher murder. Every local radio station said his name. Every home in Lancaster buzzed with disbelief. People who'd once danced to his music now replayed old memories with horror. A woman who had hired him for her wedding cried on camera. "He smiled at us. He told my husband how lucky he was. And all I could think later was, those same hands killed her." The church where he'd played at Christmas fundraisers locked its doors that week. The school erased his name from every event flyer in its archives. It wasn't just shock, it was betrayal. Because evil hadn't come from outside. It had lived among them. Neighbors described him as quiet but nice. He lived comfortably, owned his home, collected music equipment, and traveled for gigs. He'd even performed at schools, including Roorstown Elementary, years after the murder. He'd walked the same halls where Christie's memory still lingered. His wife, stunned by the arrest, told reporters, "I never saw any anger. I never saw that man." But she had seen him close the curtains on sunny days. She had seen him wake up sweating at night. And she had seen the way his hands trembled whenever news stories about cold cases played on television. No one realized those were the cracks in the mask. In the courtroom, 2 families faced each other, one bound by loss, the other by shame. Mary Merrick, now frail and gray, sat in the front row beside her son Vincent. Across the aisle, Rowe's wife sat silently, clutching her daughter's hand. When Rowe entered the courtroom in handcuffs, the room went still. He avoided eye contact with Christie's family, but Mary's eyes didn't move from him. Not once. "That's him," she whispered to her son. "That's the man who took her." The trial itself was brief. The evidence was unshakable. DNA, absolute, mathematical, undeniable. To spare his family further pain, Rowe accepted a plea agreement. He admitted to killing Christy Myrick and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was silent as the judge read the final line. "You will spend the rest of your life in the custody of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania." When asked if he wanted to speak, Rowe stood. His voice cracked, the first time emotion seemed real. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want her family to have peace." He sat down. Mary looked at him once more and whispered, "You don't get to use her name." The judge struck the gavel. It was over. But peace doesn't come from verdicts. Only truth does. After the sentencing, Emily returned to her lab. She opened the cold storage one last time and held the empty evidence tube that had once contained Christy's sample. "She waited 26 years for this," Emily said softly, "and she never stopped speaking." She placed the tube back, shut the door, and wrote on the case file in neat handwriting, "Solved, 2018. Then she slid it onto the shelf. Her job was done. Her promise kept. Detective Keating stood outside the courthouse that afternoon. The crowd had dispersed. The press vans were gone. Only snow remained. Soft, quiet, indifferent. He thought about Christy's classroom. The paper snowflakes. The lesson plan still on the board. "Justice doesn't erase tragedy," he said to a reporter later. "It just lets people breathe again." He looked toward the horizon. The same Pennsylvania skyline that had seen both her life and her death, and whispered a line that once appeared in Stenson's notebook. "Don't forget her." The houses glow in warm light. Christmas decorations shimmer softly. Life continues, but underneath it all lies the memory of one teacher who changed a town forever. He thought he could bury the truth beneath time, beneath music, beneath smiles. But truth has a way of surviving the dark. It lived in DNA, waiting, silent, precise, unstoppable. It lived in the people who refused to forget, in detectives who refused to close the file, in a scientist who believed that molecules could carry memory. In the end, it wasn't anger that caught him. It was patience. It was love that refused to fade. Because even after 26 years, Christy Myrick still mattered. And that is why the truth finally came home. The courtroom was quiet now. The press had left. The gavel had long fallen. But the story, Christy's story, still echoed in every corner of Lancaster. Because justice might end on paper, but in hearts, it lingers. And for the Myrick family, silence after 26 years wasn't peace. It was just another kind of waiting. Raymond Rowe, the man once known as DJ Freeze, was processed into State Correctional Institution Houtsdale in early 2019. He traded his pressed shirts and gold chain for an orange jumpsuit. His stage became a concrete cell. His audience, silence. Every morning, he woke to the clang of metal doors and the shuffle of other inmates. But none of it compared to the weight of what followed him into that cell, the face of a young woman who trusted the world. For the first few months, he refused interviews. He spoke to no one, not even his prison counselor. But one day, in a letter sent to his family, a letter that would later reach investigators, he wrote a single line that said more than any interview ever could. "I've been living two lives, and now they've finally met." Months later, during a recorded counseling session, Rowe agreed to talk. He sat across from a therapist, his voice almost inaudible beneath the hum of the fan. "I remember her smile," he said. "Everyone liked her. She had this light." When asked why he did it, his face tightened. He stared at the wall. "I was angry," he whispered. "Not at her, just at the world. At everyone who had what I didn't. She was happy. I wanted to feel that. but all I did was destroy it." He paused, rubbing his wrists as though the handcuffs still burned. "Every song I played for 26 years, he continued. "I thought I could drown her voice out, but I couldn't. She was in every note." It wasn't remorse that made his words powerful. It was emptiness. The sound of a man realizing that the mask he'd worn had fused to his face. When the Myrics received a transcript of the confession, they didn't know what to feel. Mary, now too weak to travel, listened as her son read it aloud at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "He doesn't get to remember her," she said softly. "He forfeited that right the day he took her life." Vincent Jr. didn't respond. He just stared at the candle flickering beside her old photograph. It had been burning for 26 years. Still hadn't gone out. In May 2019, the Myrics received an unexpected envelope. The return address, State Correctional Institution, Houtsdale. No name on the sender line, but they knew. Inside, 2 handwritten pages. Every word in careful, almost trembling script. "To the Myrick family, there is nothing I can say that will ever undo what I did. I took away someone you loved, someone everyone loved. I was a coward for hiding all these years. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I ask for understanding. I wish I could trade my life for hers. I wish I could go back. But time doesn't give second chances. I will spend the rest of my days remembering her name. Raymond C. Rowe." Mary never replied. She folded the letter, placed it in Christie's Bible, and whispered, "You don't get to be part of her story anymore." Detective Ryan Keating visited Rowe once in prison for a final debriefing. The case had become the cornerstone of his career and the shadow of his life. He wanted to hear it in Rowe's own words. "Why?" Rowe sat across from him, eyes downcast. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. "I didn't mean to hurt her that bad." Keating leaned forward. "You didn't hurt her," he said quietly. "You ended her. And for what? A moment of rage?" Rowe didn't respond. He just whispered, "She fought hard." Those words stayed with Keating forever, not as cruelty, but as proof of Christie's strength. Even in her final moments, she refused to give up. "She fought," he said later in an interview, "and in a way she kept fighting. Through us, through the science, through time." Forensic scientist Emily Rhodes was honored that same year for her contribution to cold case DNA genealogy. But when reporters asked her about the award, she didn't talk about the science. She talked about Christie. "Every person deserves a voice, no matter how long they've been gone," she said. "DNA doesn't just identify killers. It restores humanity to victims. It tells their story when they no longer can." Later that night, she wrote one last note in her personal journal. "Justice is not vengeance. It's memory made permanent." In church that December, Lancaster held a memorial for Christie 27 years after her death. The pews were full. Children she once taught sat among her former colleagues. And at the front of the church, beneath the soft light of stained glass, stood Vincent Jr. He took a deep breath and spoke. "People ask if I've forgiven him. I don't think forgiveness is something you decide. It's something that grows, slowly, painfully, quietly. I don't forgive what he did, but I refuse to live my life chained to his choice." Applause filled the church. Not loud, just steady, respectful, like rain against glass. In his cell, Rowe stopped talking to the press. He never wrote another letter. He spent most of his days reading or sitting quietly on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. Other inmates called him the DJ. He never corrected them. He no longer played music. He no longer smiled. A prison guard once said, "He doesn't look like a man doing time. He looks like a man who finally met time. The camera pans across the old town once more. Lancaster's streets glowing with evening light, children laughing, the world moving forward. In the end, the truth didn't bring celebration. It brought release. The Myrics didn't need revenge. They needed rest. The detectives didn't want glory, they wanted closure. And Christy, she got what every soul deserves. To be seen, to be remembered, to be heard. After 26 years of silence, the truth had finally spoken. And though the echo of that day would never fade, it carried something sacred within it. The proof that even in the darkest story, light still wins. There's a quiet that follows justice. Not peace exactly, but a softer kind of silence. The kind that hums like wind through empty hallways. The kind that feels like the world finally exhaling after holding its breath for 26 years. For Christy Myrick, that silence became something sacred. Because though her life was taken in 1992, her story didn't end there. It became something larger, something that would change the way an entire generation looked at truth, memory, and time. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 2019. The same streets that once whispered in fear now carried laughter again. Children rode bicycles past the old townhouse complex, where the horror had once lived and then faded into legend. But every December, without fail, the community still gathered. They called it Christie's Light Night. At Rohrstown Elementary, candles lined the walkway leading to the school doors. Students, teachers, and families stood shoulder to shoulder, holding lights in silence. No speeches, no reporters, just reflection. Inside, room 14 had been turned into a memorial study room, its walls covered with the drawings and letters of students who came long after she was gone. On one bulletin board, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Be kind, be curious, be like Miss Myrick." A framed photograph of her stood beside the window, her smile bright, timeless, alive. In 2020, the Christy L. Myrick Memorial Scholarship was established. Each year, one graduating senior from Lancaster County pursuing education or social work received it. The first recipient, a young woman named Danielle Walsh, stood on stage and said, "I never met Miss Myrick, but every teacher I've ever had tells me I remind them of her. I want to teach the way she did, with joy, with patience, with hope." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Mary Myrick wept quietly in the front row, clutching her son's hand. "She's still teaching," Mary whispered, "even now." In Harrisburg, forensic scientist Emily Rhodes continued her work. The Myrick case became a landmark, one of the first in Pennsylvania solved entirely through genealogical DNA tracing. It inspired the creation of new funding for cold case technology, ensuring no evidence sat forgotten again. Emily spoke at universities and conferences around the world, but every presentation ended the same way. She would display a single photo, a smiling teacher with kind eyes, and she would say, "Science gave us the match, but love gave us the reason." Afterward, there was always silence, not because the audience didn't understand, but because they did. Detective Ryan Keating retired in 2022. On his final day, he visited the cold case room one last time. The shelves were different now, brighter, newer, many boxes marked "Solved." But he found the one that mattered most. Myrick, Christy L. He ran his hand over the label, tracing the letters slowly. He remembered his mentor, Detective Stenson. He remembered the promise written in that old notebook, "Don't forget her." He smiled faintly. "We didn't," he said softly. "We never did." He turned off the lights and walked away, the door clicking shut behind him. But the promise stayed lit forever. By the time the 30th anniversary of Christie's passing arrived, Lancaster had changed. There were new stores, new houses, new faces. but the soul of the town carried her story like a heartbeat. Teachers told her story to new staff during orientation. Parents taught their children to lock their doors, but also to never lose trust in goodness. And once a year, the entire town gathered at the church for a memorial service called the Lesson of Light. It wasn't about the crime anymore. It was about compassion, about remembering that even in the darkest story, there are people who refuse to give up. In 2023, at 81 years old, Mary Myrick passed away peacefully in her sleep. At her bedside was the same candle she had lit for Christy every December for 3 decades. Her son Vincent lit it again at her funeral. "For both of them," he said, "mother and daughter, the light that never went out." He placed the candle in front of Christy's old photo at the church altar. It burned steadily, unwavering. Later that evening, he sat in his car, watching the glow fade into the night. "She got her justice," he whispered, "and Mom finally got her peace." Somewhere across the state, in a concrete cell, Raymond Rowe aged quietly. He rarely spoke. He no longer smiled. Inmates said he spent hours staring at a small patch of sky through the barred window, watching the light move across the wall each afternoon. No visitors, no interviews, no more letters. Time had finally done to him what he had done to Christy, taken everything. And in the silence of that cell, the echoes of a classroom, a laugh, a life once full of light, were all that remained. The Myrick case changed Pennsylvania law enforcement forever. It paved the way for a statewide cold case genetic initiative, funding hundreds of DNA reexaminations that brought justice to other families long forgotten. New detectives called it the Christie effect, a reminder that persistence and empathy must always share the same space. In a 2024 documentary, Emily Rhodes summed it up best. "We didn't just solve a case. We rewrote what justice means. Justice isn't only about punishment. It's about remembrance, about ensuring that good people aren't lost in the noise of time." The final scene opens on Rohrstown Elementary, present day. Children run across the playground, laughing in the afternoon sun. The camera glides through the open door of room 14, now bright, peaceful, alive. On the chalkboard, a single sentence is written in neat cursive. The meaning of giving, the same words Christy had written the morning she died. The camera lingers there. The light grows warmer. She never got to finish that lesson, but maybe through everything that came after, she finally did. Because Christy Myrick gave the world something without knowing it. A reason to believe that truth never dies, that kindness never fades, and that love, even through tragedy, endures. In every unsolved case, there is a voice waiting to be heard. And when we listen, really listen, we find not just answers, but the humanity that binds us all. For every Christy Myrick, there are countless others still waiting in the dark. May we keep the light on until they, too, are found. The snow falls softly over Lancaster again. It's December, the same month, the same chill, the same kind of quiet that filled the air in 1992. But this time, the silence feels different. It isn't born of fear, it's peace. A small candle glows in the window of the old Myrick family home. No one lives there anymore. The curtains are drawn. The house sold to a new family, but every year, without fail, someone from the neighborhood stops by on December 21st to place a candle in that window. No one knows who started it. No one needs to. The flame has never gone out. It flickers gently against the frost, casting long, golden reflections across the glass. A light that says we remember. Time doesn't erase tragedy. It doesn't undo loss. But sometimes it gives us something else, a way to carry the pain differently, a way to turn sorrow into legacy and loss into light. The camera moves through the quiet halls of Rohrstown Elementary. The bulletin boards are colorful again. Laughter echoes faintly through the corridors. In room 14, a teacher writes on the board, "Kindness is the greatest lesson." The children repeat it in unison. Their voices are clear, full of life. The same kind of life Christy once nurtured. The camera pans slowly toward the classroom window, where sunlight streams in soft and golden. The same warmth that once fell on her desk all those years ago. At home in retirement, Detective Ryan Keating sits on his porch, flipping through an old file, the one marked Myrick, Christy L. He closes it gently, sets it on the table beside him, and looks into the camera. "People think solving a case means closure," he says. "But real closure isn't in the arrest. It's in remembering who she was before that day. That's what keeps her alive." He looks up at the fading light, and for the first time in years, he smiles. In her lab, Emily Rhodes stands before a row of DNA samples glowing under fluorescent light. She places her hand on the shelf that once held Christy's evidence tube. "People call it science," she says quietly, "but to me it's faith. Every cell carries a story. Every truth, no matter how small, waits for the right moment to be seen." She turns off the lights, and the room fades to darkness. Only the hum of the machines remains. A child placing a candle on a classroom desk. Snow drifting across the church steeple. A stack of cold case files labeled solved. A mother's framed photograph on a nightstand. A candle burning steady against the dark. They say every story ends, but maybe some stories don't. Maybe the ones built on love, courage, and truth keep echoing through the people they touch. Maybe light doesn't die. It just changes form. The camera pans upward, the candle flame dissolving into sunlight breaking through clouds. The music softens into a single, lingering note. This isn't a story about death. It's a story about remembrance. About a woman who taught a generation what kindness looked like. About a town that refused to forget her. About science that caught up with love. And about a light that never went out. If this story moved you, help us keep memories like Christy's alive. Subscribe to this channel and join us as we bring more forgotten stories back into the light. Stories of truth, resilience, and humanity that remind us justice never truly sleeps.